They thought it was just another arrest. A group of officers laughing, joking, treating a black man's humiliation like some kind of entertainment. Cameras rolling. Handcuffs clicking. Another routine stop, or so they thought. But what they didn't realize was who they were really dealing with. He didn't shout. He didn't resist. He just looked at them, calm, composed, almost too calm. There was something in his eyes, something that should have made them pause. But arrogance blinded them. And so, they dragged him away, mocking him every step of the way. Hours later, those same officers walked into a courtroom, only to freeze in disbelief. Because sitting high above them, wearing the very robes of justice, was the man they'd laughed at, the man they'd arrested. What happened next wasn't just karma, it was a lesson. A reminder that power can shift in an instant, and that respect should never depend on the color of a man's skin. Now tell me, where are you watching this from right now? It started like any other morning. Marcus Hill had always believed in doing the right thing, working hard, staying humble, and earning his place in a world that didn't always play fair. At 38, he had built a life that made his late mother proud, a respected defense attorney known for his calm voice, sharp mind, and quiet dignity. Every weekday, before stepping into the courthouse, he stopped at a small cafe on Maple Street. The owner, an old friend, always had his order ready: black coffee, no sugar. To anyone watching, Marcus looked like any other man in a suit, briefcase in hand, heading to work. No one would guess that behind that calm expression was someone who had spent his entire life fighting against prejudice, not just in courtrooms, but in everyday moments most people never see. He had seen the system fail people who looked like him. That's why he became a lawyer, to make sure that when justice spoke, it didn't whisper only for some. His reputation had grown quietly over the years, and so had the number of people who both respected and resented him. That morning, he had a hearing scheduled for a case that had stirred tension in the city, a young black teenager wrongfully accused of assaulting an officer. Marcus knew the evidence didn't add up. He knew the truth, and that made him a threat to the ones who preferred silence over accountability. As he left his house that day, the air felt heavier than usual. The streets were quiet, too quiet. He didn't think much of it, just another Monday, he told himself. But a few blocks from home, a patrol car slowed beside him. Then another. He didn't panic. He had done nothing wrong. Still, there's something chilling about blue lights flashing behind you, even when you've spent your career defending others from what comes next. Within moments, laughter echoed from the officers as they stepped out, smirking, confident. They didn't see Marcus Hill, the respected lawyer. They only saw a black man walking alone in a nice neighborhood. He adjusted his tie, trying to stay composed. But deep down, a familiar ache returned, one he thought he'd long outgrown. He'd fought racism in the courtroom for years. He just never thought it would come for him, on his own street. And what happened in the next few minutes would leave the entire city speechless. Marcus had been through enough trials to know how quickly situations can spiral, but nothing could have prepared him for this. The officer's tone was mocking from the start. One leaned on the hood of his cruiser, smirking, while the other circled Marcus like a predator sizing up its prey. They demanded ID, voice sharp and casual all at once, like they were performing for an audience that didn't exist. Marcus calmly reached into his jacket, announcing every move like he'd advised his own clients to do countless times. But still, their hands hovered over their weapons. He could feel the weight of their suspicion pressing down on him, suffocating. "Lawyer, huh?" one of them sneered after glancing at his credentials. "Sure you are." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it cut deep. People across the street watched but didn't step in. Phones stayed in pockets. Windows shut quietly. It was as if the city itself had turned its back. Marcus had spent his life fighting for justice, but in that moment, he wasn't an attorney or a citizen, he was just another black man being treated like a threat. They told him he matched a description. No proof, no reason, just a phrase that had destroyed countless lives. His heart pounded, but his voice stayed steady. He knew panic could be deadly. Still, every word he spoke seemed to make them angrier, as if his calmness was defiance. "Put your hands where we can see them." The command came like thunder. Before he could even respond, one officer shoved him against the hood of the car. His briefcase fell open, papers scattering across the pavement, the words State vs. Daniels visible on the top page. Irony in motion. The crowd grew, phones now raised. But no one spoke. Silence and recording, that was the new way to watch injustice unfold. Marcus tried to breathe, his cheek pressed cold against the metal. He could hear the mocking laughter again. "Not so smart now, one officer muttered. In that moment, something broke, not just his pride, but his belief that education, success, or status could protect him from the color of his skin. They cuffed him roughly, dragging him to the back of the car. His wrists burned from the metal, his dignity stripped in front of strangers. As the doors slammed shut, he caught his reflection in the window, suit wrinkled, eyes steady, but soul shaking. He wanted to scream, to fight, to remind them of who he was, but he didn't. Instead, he thought of every client who had sat in his office, trembling, saying, "They didn't believe me either." Now, he understood that pain in a way he never wanted to. The car began to move, lights flashing, sirens silent. Through the tinted glass, the city blurred by, a city he'd spent his life serving, now turning into a cage. At the station, the humiliation continued. Fingerprints, mugshots, whispers from other officers. Some recognized him, their smirks shifting to confusion, then discomfort. But none stepped in. Power protected its own. He sat in the holding cell, staring at the concrete wall, every second stretching like an hour. His phone had been taken, his briefcase confiscated. He didn't even know if anyone knew where he was. Then came the worst part, the laughter from outside the bars. They were talking about him like he was a joke, a fancy lawyer who thought he was above the law. But Marcus wasn't thinking about revenge. He was thinking about the boy whose trial he was supposed to defend that morning. A boy who, at that very moment, might be sitting alone in a courtroom waiting for someone who would never show up. Hours passed. The laughter faded. Then the door opened. A deputy walked in, expression uneasy. "You might want to stand up," he muttered quietly. Marcus did. He didn't know why, but something in the deputy's tone was different. The air shifted. Moments later, the officers who had arrested him walked by, their faces drained of color. They didn't meet his eyes this time. They couldn't. Because the man they'd mocked, humiliated, and handcuffed was about to walk into that same courthouse they thought they'd stripped him of. And when he did, the world would see justice, not from behind bars, but from behind the bench. But that moment was still just seconds away. The courtroom was silent. The kind of silence that presses against your chest, thick and suffocating. Every eye was fixed on the door as it opened, and in stepped Marcus Hill. But this time, he wasn't in handcuffs. He wasn't in the back of a patrol car. He was wearing the black judicial robes of a federal judge. The same man those officers had mocked and humiliated hours before now stood at the head of the very system they'd claimed to represent. The laughter that had filled the station that morning was replaced by stunned whispers. One of the officers blinked, jaw tightening as realization sank in. The other avoided eye contact entirely, shifting uneasily in his seat. Marcus walked with the same calm composure he'd always carried, but inside, a storm raged. His wrists still ached from the cuffs. His pride still bore the scars of their laughter. And yet, standing there, he knew this wasn't just about revenge. This was about truth. He took his seat at the bench, gavel before him, the seal of justice behind him. The courtroom clerk read the case number, State vs. Daniels. The same trial he was meant to oversee that morning. The same young black teen they said looked suspicious. For a moment, Marcus looked at the boy sitting at the defendant's table, frightened, hands trembling. He saw himself in that boy. The fear. The doubt. The feeling that the world was already against you before you could even speak. Then his gaze shifted, to the officers who had arrested him. They were seated in the witness area now, called in for their role in the same case. Irony had come full circle. Every word Marcus spoke carried the weight of his experience. His voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It was measured, deliberate, the sound of a man reclaiming his dignity. The officers squirmed as the evidence was laid bare, bodycam footage, inconsistencies, their laughter echoing through the speakers for all to hear. It wasn't just an arrest anymore. It was exposure. And for the first time, they had no control. As the video ended, the courtroom stayed frozen in disbelief. The boy's mother wept quietly. The jurors exchanged looks. Even the reporters, usually so quick to move on, were still. Marcus leaned forward, eyes locked on the officers. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "Justice," he said, "isn't a costume you wear when it's convenient. It's a duty. One that doesn't vanish because of skin color." The words hung in the air like a verdict of their own. When the final ruling was announced, the courtroom erupted in quiet disbelief. The young boy, falsely accused, was cleared of all charges. Justice, real justice, had been served. But for Marcus Hill, that victory was only part of the story. As the officers were escorted out, their once proud faces now pale with regret, Marcus didn't smile. There was no satisfaction in watching them fall, only a deep, aching truth settling in his chest. What happened to him that morning wasn't unique. It was a symptom of something far larger, a reflection of how deeply injustice can hide behind a badge, a title, or a uniform. He left the courthouse alone that evening, the sun dipping low behind the city skyline. The same street that had witnessed his humiliation now saw him walking free, head high, heart heavier than ever. Every step reminded him of the man he'd been that morning, confident, certain that his position would protect him. He knew better now. Because if a judge could be treated like a suspect, what hope was there for those without power, without witnesses, without a voice? In the days that followed, the story spread like wildfire. Headlines called it the arrest that exposed the system. The footage went viral, not just the bodycam, but the moment Marcus walked into court in those robes. Millions watched. Some cheered. Others grew silent. Conversations began, uncomfortable ones, about respect, authority, and what it truly means to see someone's humanity. But for Marcus, it wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about awakening. He began speaking out, not just in courtrooms, but in communities, schools, and police departments. He wanted to make sure no one else would have to prove their worth before being treated with dignity. Still, there were nights he'd wake up thinking about those few minutes, the cold metal of the handcuffs, the smirk on that officer's face, the laughter. It stayed with him like a scar. A reminder that even when the law says you're free, the fight for equality is far from over. Yet, something powerful was born from that pain, resolve. He understood that silence is comfort for the oppressor, not the oppressed. And as long as he had a voice, he would use it. Because this wasn't just his story. It was the story of every man who's been judged before he could speak. Every woman who's been dismissed before she could be heard. Every child who's been taught to fear the lights of a police car instead of feeling safe beneath them. Marcus stood on the courthouse steps one last time, looking out at the crowd, reporters, activists, strangers holding signs that read "Justice for All." He didn't say much, just one line that cut through the noise. Respect isn't something you earn after you're proven innocent. It's something every human deserves, from the very start. The applause faded, but his words stayed. Because this story, his story, isn't just a headline. It's a warning, a mirror, a call to wake up before another name becomes a hashtag. So ask yourself, when justice is on trial, whose side will you be on? Where are you watching this from right now?